Hey, Julia Barzyk from Wise Investigator. So today I'm joined by Dr. Fred Gregory. He brings more than 12 years' experience at the cutting edge of neuroscience, human machine integration, and defense research strategy. Fred has directed more than $400 million in research portfolios. He's held senior scientific leadership roles with the U.S. Army, and he's worked in international programs as well as a DARPA program. So this is a great conversation. Fred provides insight into what DoD program managers are actually trying to do as they build a larger programmatic vision, why you don't want to just bring a next logical step type of proposed effort to DoD, but how you can think about a bolder, more exciting vision and communicate that to a program officer to have success in those conversations. So he also talks about what PIs often misunderstand about mission relevance and the importance of focusing on a foundational science and how you want to make first contact with the program manager and some of the realities about the challenges that you can face when you're trying to get in contact with those individuals. So, this is a great conversation. It's full of a wealth of information here. So, please enjoy. Okay, Fred. So, thank you for joining me today. Can you tell us what, when you were a program manager, were you actually trying to accomplish in that job?
So thanks, Julia, for having me. And that's a fundamental question in the program manager role, right? Because most academics think that we're trying to get proposals, approve or deny proposals, but it actually goes much deeper than that. Because the first thing that I'm looking for in a proposal is how well does this fit within my programmatic vision? And so within the role as a program manager for Army Research Office, the first thing I had to do when moving into the role was to figure out, okay, first off, I had to figure out how am I going to run a neuroscience program in a non-medical part of the Army? So having grown up in an NIH-centric world as a neurobiology student on postdoc, it was very focused on clinical implications. And so that's how I thought about the world and how particularly most biomedical scientists think about the world. But having that lens now of, okay, now I'm moving in the military. We have to think about military applications. There is a medical side of the Army, but that's not where I am. My job back then in research development and engineering command was to think about it from more material focused. So what are the things that the Army needs and they can use to address future challenges? And so that forced me to recalibrate my thinking around what neuroscience meant in the first place. And so with that lens, then looking at the far projections for what, the Army thinks it needs for 2035 and beyond back then, now 2040 and beyond, translating those into scientific gaps, seeing like what are major scientific gaps that would prevent us from achieving the goals or achieving the scientific outcomes that would allow us to build new material solutions for the Army of the future. And so the things I wanted to accomplish were centered around what are novel experiments, analytical tools, or theories that would be able to forge new territory in a scientific field, generate new questions, allow us to address new questions, and revolutionize our thinking about how mechanistic biology works, as an example.
Well, I relate to that because coming into ARO from geoscience myself, that was another discipline where I felt like I had to do selling within the organization. So some PIs might feel like, well, these folks are in these jobs, they're a program manager, program officer, so there must be, a need for that role, which there is, but it doesn't mean it ends there. We were hired into those positions, the budgets were there, but we often had to do a lot of strategizing and selling within the organization. So that's a part that of the job that many people may not be so aware
Right.
of. Okay. Awesome. Well, if you could tell a faculty member one thing about getting funded, just kind of one big piece of advice before we get into the rest of the conversation where we'll break things down if somebody's not able to watch much longer in the video? What's kind of the one word of wisdom, strategy or tactical that you would convey?
I would say don't bring the next logical experiment to the table. Bring me the one that you're worried that it may not work because it's a little too far out there. It's not proven yet. And be okay if it doesn't. If the answer is, I don't know yet. Oftentimes, particularly in our traditional ways of looking at research funding, we're having conversations that are really risk averse. And and if we are, looking at an NIH centric way of looking at this, I have to propose, I have to have already done the experiment before I can propose to do it. And show the data that I can actually do the thing. In DoD, and particularly in the basic research offices, where we had this far-term vision, we were tasked with being able to take on high-risk, high-reward opportunities. There was an open opportunity to speak with faculty about, what's beyond that next step. What's down there? What's the crazy experiment in your mind? Like that's the place where we want to start with you.
I love that. And yeah, that's great. That's a big part of why our jobs were so fun.
Yeah.
Great. Well, so then moving into the decisions around funding, could you tell us three or a couple signals that communicated to you that this is an idea that should be funded?
Oftentimes, if an idea, comes across as, this isn't the popular view in the field. Here's the dogma about this concept, this theory, whatever it may be, and here's how the rest of the field thinks it should go. But I have this, I just have this really, this crazy idea that something's different. And if I only address this new approach, this new way of thinking, this new theory about it, this could be the thing. And so that kind of goes back at that crazy experiment test. So I always use that as my lens into, is this a good idea, something worthwhile potentially for the Army? Because, you know, in our roles within DoD, and particularly in the Army, we have relatively smaller budgets compared to other funding agencies. So we're not working at the capacity to, have 100 proposals come in for, one solicitation. They only, maybe 5 to 10 might be the right, the right amount.
Yeah. Yeah, and I always wanted to know to make sure I was well informed on what the much larger programs that had some potential overlap with mine were doing, right? Because I didn't want to throw pennies after dollars.
Right.
So, yeah, okay. Well,
Yeah.
what's something that applicants might think matters a lot when they're going about their proposal preparation or even before that when they're thinking about applying? Something that you saw them give a lot of consideration to or worry about that may matter less than they assume.
Yeah. Yeah. The number one that always makes me chuckle is the Army relevance, and seeing how PI has spent so much time, trying to explain, this is so relevant to the Army. Here's the thing here's what I'm going to solve for the Army. And usually they were wrong on their assumptions. And I would always say, I don't want you to tell me the Army relevance. Like I can tell you what that's going to be on the back end. I can prompt you on where to go there, because these are, we don't work in a world that's static. Like this is a high pace environment that can evolve very rapidly. And so what you might read on a website one day or read in a document one day might be very different the next, because some event happened in the world, that changed the posture for defense. Some technological advancement happened, you know, that can change the trajectory of things. So don't spend as much time on Army relevance and spend your time on articulating how valuable your science is from a foundational perspective. What's the potential to close a gap in the field broadly that we couldn't do before? Like, what's this new capability scientific or engineering capability, if we were to solve that gap, that can actually provide solutions that might be beneficial for what the Army needs. Start more there, and then allow the program manager to help you navigate, because as you just pointed out, with respect to other funding agencies, I mean, that was another part of the job that was really fun and exciting to me, to be able to look at what NIH, NSF, any other funding agencies across DoD, what are they funding? Looking at the scientific and engineering landscape, what's the state of the art in this field, or in the relevant fields to the areas that I want to impact for my program? Who are the players in these fields? What are new ideas popping up? There's so much that we navigate in the role to understand our own individual landscapes as program managers, to be able to, as when we receive a proposal, we we use all of that information in our lens of, is this appropriate or not? So it becomes a little harder then to answer the question, actually, like, what's the thing that I would look for in a proposal? Because it's not one thing, it's sort of all things at once. And it's a confluence of factors that would dictate ultimately, with the scientific possibility, or of advancing a foundational concept being the number one, but the confluence of those factors leading to, this is interesting. Like, let's explore this.
Yeah, and when you were talking about that due diligence that we had to do to make sure we understand as much as we could everything that was going out there, especially to avoid duplication of effort, that's making me reminding me too that that's sometimes something that the PI can help communicate. They can help provide
Yeah,
that context. Of course, we would
absolutely.
always do our own research with evaluations and our own conversations with colleagues at other agencies, but it certainly doesn't hurt when they can present some of that context too, because we did have to consider these potential investments within a context and often a relatively small
Yeah.
budget. So, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Well, then thinking flipping that question a little bit when we were talking about something that they thought mattered, but maybe didn't matter so much. So what would be something that does matter, that is important, but that may not be seen in a proposal document? Because a lot of PIs are really thinking about that document. That document is very important, but there's more around that, right? That the document isn't really what's getting funded. It's the entire effort that that document is representing. So what is important but may not be apparent from a written proposal?
That's a good one, because what comes to mind mostly is, think about the risk tolerance, and that, it's sort of, people are fearful of the risk, but you kind of you're able to see within a proposal. Yes, I'm substantiating my thinking here. Like, here's a relevant context, scientific context that is unexplored, underexplored. It's new, or it may be that this is well established. We have that context, but the part that really matters beyond the context, between the context and here's what I'm going to do, here are the experiments, or here are the approaches that I'm going to bring to the table. It's connecting, connecting the relevance, connecting the approaches to give you a little bit of a picture of, this has the potential to bring more to the field than just the one experiment. This sort of challenges a bit of thinking. This opens the potential for the risk to be tolerable. So let's put it that way. It enables risk to be tolerable if, yes, I can substantiate an idea. I can, present a plan that's, it's pretty risky. Like, no one's done this before, but expressing that bit of, but this could work. And it's only because of me putting these pieces in place, which hopefully you would say, like, here's my unique approach. Here's a unique thinking. Here's a unique experimental paradigm, or whatever the uniqueness that you're bringing to the table, that we're able to extract the unwritten dynamic of the uniqueness of, as it as it brings a set of opportunities to the table that could enable risk to actually be, be
That
okay to accept.
that's making me think that what you're talking about here is the proposal is one thing, but the proposal is communicating in a way a vision that's really beyond that effort and beyond that
Yeah,
proposal. So that we're
right.
reading the proposal, we say, okay, there is a research plan, there are tasks outlined, we've got that practical part, we're going to be responsible here and do the work we said we're going to do. But you're already able to envision all the future follow-on type of discoveries or just even applications or whatever it could be down the road. And that reminds me right now, since we're working with quite a few clients on NSF career proposals, about how important it is for them in those proposals to explain that bigger vision. And that can be one thing that PIs struggle on. We support them to get that right with the career
Yeah,
proposal. However, just because you're not writing an NSF career proposal doesn't mean that you don't want to communicate that as well, that bigger vision so that whoever reads it can understand, okay, what is the beyond this potentially that we could achieve. So, yeah, and that's another one of those fun things to think about, right? The exciting part.
hmm
Cool. Okay, so one thing that PIs often struggle with, especially if they're in a discipline that's, well, if they're, say, doing interdisciplinary type work, or if they're dealing with an organization like DoD, where you might have programs that are centered around problem areas, maybe instead of traditional disciplines, they can wonder, where is the right fit for my proposed effort? Now, could you give some guidance to a faculty member who's starting to think, not sure exactly sure where this fits? Like, how might they go about determining where the right fit is for an idea?
Yeah, and that's always difficult when particularly dealing with DoD agencies because the information's hard to come by in some cases. Even being in government, would always have to Google programs in other areas of DoD. But I would say it's taking as much information as possible, particularly from broad agency announcements. I mean, that's probably the best place to get that data because broad agency announcements are enduring. It's not an annual call. They last for several years at a time. Programs evolve over time, but typically there's some level of resilience to a program, and a program really being the program manager. But seeing the broad agency announcements as a primary source of intelligence to be able to extract some of those hidden messages that we say, I mean, because it's a broad announcement. It's not called a specific call for the one thing we want to do. I'm trying to articulate my three, typically three vision areas, my three, I forgot the terms we always use, but we always change those terms. But from a vision, we go down to kind of those three primary areas that we want to target. We use those titles in the broad agency announcement with a very generic description because we don't want to limit ideas, we don't want to limit thinking around the problem. We want to, hey, this is the idea that hey, this is something that might be relevant, and either we have a conversation or you submit an inquiry, that suggests, hey, here's how my thinking, experiment, my whatever I'm bringing to the table, how it might be relevant to solving a scientific gap, not the army gap, but the scientific gap, um, that that's relevant to your question or your area, whatever the thing is you identify, and starting from there.
So then, if they find a potential fit, what is your advice for making that first contact? And this is an important question to ask and have answered because this is where a lot of PIs have a lot of anxiety. And it's may sound easy to say, just send an email. And some of them can do that, you know, successfully with not really much more encouragement or instruction. But even if it's something that's been said before, could you please explain how to make that contact? Because this is a real sticking point for PIs.
Yeah. And I'll only speak for myself. I won't say this for other people, but I was pretty terrible at keeping track of email, staying up on email, because that's the other side of the program manager job that people don't see is how involved we are outside of just looking at your grant and, running a program. As I kind of mentioned, doing surveillance in the field, you're out visiting with people, surveilling DoD, going to Army meetings. Look at what is Air Force doing, what is Navy doing also. What are they doing on the health side of the Army or the military? Spending time doing all that stuff and still trying to run a program, which makes it difficult for many of the administrative tasks when when now like hundred PIs, send emails over a period. It's hard to keep up with everyone. So it's important to at least, whether it's through email, sometimes even a phone call. Man, I'm sitting at my desk, I would actually get a phone call and pick it up. Or see someone in person, like I'm at a meeting at a conference, and that's actually a good time. It's just send an email, say, "Hey, are you going to be at a conference? Can we meet up?" You're in my case, I was the neurophysiology program manager for a while. So, hey, are you going to be at Society for Neuroscience? I'm going. It's like, oh, no, I'm not going this time, but here's some other time we could meet, things like that. So, and even if you don't get a response, I would always say, hey, don't give up on the first track because I'm thinking about other stuff here. I may miss your email. Other times it could be saw an email in transit moving around, but it's not really a great fit for the program vision. It doesn't stick out in some way. So, now there are 100 other things to do that and you just keep on going and forget about it. So what you could do is to whatever form of communication you make, ensuring that you are providing that vision, letting the vision come across, okay, from the vision, here's how I uniquely perceive an opportunity to drive forward this new scientific approach, this new experiment, whatever the thing is you're going to do that's going to address a foundational gap in the field that the Army should care about. So thinking about the audience in a way of, really the communication around why should this matter to you rather than, hey, my experiment is super awesome.
Yeah. And you probably this might be a loaded question, but I think you'll back me up here, so I'll say it because it might help clarify. So I think from what I hear you're saying is that it would be more useful for you to get an email where somebody expressed a vision of what they wanted to do rather than a PI who says, "Oh, this is I'm a assistant professor in this department and I've worked on this and this and this in the past," because that's kind of looking backwards and someone understandably might feel like, oh, I want the recipient to understand I have these good credentials, I've done important work. But we know that, anybody who's in those positions has done important work and has great credentials. So you're really what I hear you saying is you want to know about that vision as soon as possible, right? Because that's what would get
Yeah.
you excited, right?
Yeah, because, I can think of a few good stories, but I mean, there are quite a few times when, there was a conversation with the PI, around, okay, here's my awesome idea. One in particular I can think about. Here's my awesome idea in Alzheimer's research. This is the biggest thing for Alzheimer's. I'm in the non-medical side of the Army, so like, I can't invest my funds toward Alzheimer's research. But he was able to say something about his vision around it, where I could connect to the Army relevance. So I asked probing questions and like, well, would you be interested in this other thing? I won't say what that is now, but there was where Alzheimer's research, and it wasn't the research itself, it was the molecular mechanisms that he was trying to explore. Those molecular mechanisms were relevant in quite a few Army relevant contexts. And it's like, would you think about doing something in these other areas? Well, that turned into a total revamp of what he was going to propose into a proposal that I was able to fund that led to other proposals for, at a larger DoD effort. And this was at a minority serving institution. So it turned into a whole new area of research for his lab that expanded really opportunities for students on campus. It did a lot. And it was because he was able to talk to me about his vision for where this is going, and rather than, being so focused on that next experiment.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's a great success story. Yeah. And it really highlights that it's a collaborative conversation that you're having at
Yeah.
the front end, because you can't expect the PI to, like you were saying back to your comments about the Army relevance, you're not expecting them to know what all of those potential applications are. And in this case, it worked out, right? That he was able to mention the Alzheimer's stuff, but he fortunately connected with you who could dig a little bit deeper. Because, yeah, not every program manager, even every time you contact a program manager, are they always necessarily going to have that presence of mind or the availability to ask those deeper questions? Now, hopefully they will. Often I think they will, and the more that you can communicate that vision and the excitement on the front end and the fundamental aspects of the work, I think the more you're giving them to latch onto perhaps and have the deeper conversation. So that's a great
Yeah.
success story. Okay. Well, then moving on to proposals that are successful, what in the first couple pages of a proposal might you want to see that's going to tell you this is something I want to keep reading. This is something that I'm feeling positive about right on the outset. And I guess you could answer this, of course, from your experience as a program manager in your area of expertise, but you could also think about answering from the perspective of a reviewer, because we all ended up reviewing proposals that weren't exactly in our program. They may have even been outside of our area of expertise for various administrative reasons. We were called in to perform evals. So, it's a little different when those first 2 pages, you're reading them as a technical expert, because maybe they're not quite as important, but especially when you're evaluating something that's a little bit outside your own expertise. Would you talk a little bit about those first 2 pages, if you will?
Mhm. Yeah, like I said, the first thing is, the contextualization of where you're going with your proposal, right? But oftentimes, and this is really a challenge across science broadly. But one of the things that I personally look for is, because I think quite a lot about multi-scale mechanisms. And the multi-scale is what kills us, whether in biology or physics. We tend to focus heavily on our one scale of understanding the world, and that's where some of that vision comes in, because I'm kind of looking for, there's a bigger context beyond just this molecular mechanism. There's actually a cellular context. There's an organismal context, behavioral context, where this molecular event fits into, and that here's why, if understanding this actually helps me get to, the multi-scale understanding in the end. For me personally, that's where what excites me the most in reading, is to see that there's at least a consideration beyond the little thing that I'm trying to solve. Because if we're really honest about it, we're, as scientists, engineers, we're only looking at a very small piece of any puzzle, and we typically do put all of our effort into focusing on that one thing. And so if I solve this molecule, if I solve this macro phenomenon, I've solved the world. And it's like, no, we haven't. We're filling in a bigger piece of the whole puzzle. But being able to show how this actually gets us closer to filling the puzzle, rather than the small part that we're focusing. So, how that fits into the grand scheme of, this small part. Yes, it's small, but if we solved it, it actually allows us to do so much more. And I want to be able to see the foundational piece of it comes in where, the way we define basic research, right? It's around the foundational, but it's around the unexpected. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. And I want to be able to see I want to come away with this has the potential to like help us see that unknown, the unknown territory if we were to solve this problem here, the way that they're proposing to do it.
Yeah, that reminds me of an event that I attend often. That's an annual event of student presentations at UNC Department of Geoscience. And at that stage, these are students who are presenting, and they have focused very narrowly in on their topic area, which is completely appropriate as a student, especially if you're a PhD student. You want to demonstrate mastery of that topic and that question and go so deep into it. And this is when we're talking about then someone who's, say, an assistant professor, that's that bridge that they need to make between the student at the poster presentations and their wonderful poster presentations that are demonstrating exactly what you would want at the level of someone who's, say, a PhD student. But when you're looking at a proposal from a faculty member, that's, I think, when we're expecting them to expand their vision beyond that more narrow topic. So that's what came to mind when you were describing that in the first 2 pages, to say, be a little bold. Don't just keep yourself confined to one area. Think big, as they say, about the importance of your work and all the other aspects of it that could be influenced. So, yeah, that's very helpful, I think.
And
Okay,
that's the
so
place where we all start, right? We all
yes,
started, in our
exactly.
training. We know everything in the world there is to know about our problem space. And,
Exactly, and that's totally
and,
appropriate, so it's
and
not a
exactly.
criticism in any way,
Yeah,
but it's about moving on, and that's just such a tough transition
it
to
is.
move into those early career faculty, especially, I think, because we call them the early career positions, and they are early career in terms of there's early career awards and the way we think about it in academia, but really it's a mid-career stage in terms of if you think of the life stage that most of these folks are at. So think a little bit bigger. You might be applying for an early career award, but you're probably not actually still in your early career. You're probably mid-career. So now if we think about the proposals, going back to the proposal document itself, if you had to choose, one section of a proposal that most often needed to be revised, or an kind of an easy way to improve a proposal, is there a section that stands out? What is the one that you'd recommend people revise in order to get like a big bang for their buck on improving that document?
Hmm. I mean, for our proposals, because they're, different than other agencies outside of DoD anyway, there was an Army relevance section, and that's a space that was almost for most proposals, that was almost a dead space because it was this generic description of something, that they think the military does. And frankly, so you may not have even written anything there. And it would be just as good. So that could be a place where there's an opportunity to stand out, but an opportunity to allow the actual research component of the proposal to give it a little more life and to expand it in a way that takes the experiment from, I guess you would say, maybe this our normal way of thinking about the research part of it, into I can see how this could transition from the research lab into the real world environment that someone in the military will actually care about. Because because that's sort of the role, a part of the role, being a program manager, that I would always think about. And looking at the proposal, it's how am I going to sell this to my leadership? Because I have to justify, with all the evaluation, with my program vision, the Army relevance, how this proposal, even if it's not the best reviewed proposal, oftentimes, and that can happen sometimes, how this proposal idea allows me to articulate a message that this has the potential to be a foundational enhancement to the military, and it's worth the military investing in. It's a basic science. And remember, we're selling to an agency whose main job is not research. That's not the job of the military. Research is a function that the military enables as a part of its role, but we have to make these sort of arguments in a space where if this is not the primary thing, and also working in a zero sum game, it's worth doing this than something else. When the something else doesn't look anything like this at all.
Yeah, right, right. Sometimes I try to communicate that if someone's submitting to an NSF program, and this could be considered an oversimplification, I understand, but you might be considering, apples to apples. But when you're submitting to a DoD program, it might be looking at, an apple to an
Yeah.
orange, to a grapefruit, because your competition could be proposals on many different topics of many different
Yeah.
sizes, or even, having that money reallocated somewhere else completely. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Yeah, so if somebody were having an issue saying, "Hey, maybe my DoD relevant section is feeling a little weak, or I don't really know what to put here," would you recommend they reach out to a program manager and say, "Hey, could you give me some guidance here?" Or what might they do to make that stronger?
That would be a great idea. Program manager isn't there to tell you, what to write. But I know I would actually, if asked the question, hey, maybe you should take a look at this. Have you heard about this new program in DOD, or seen this new article, written in the Army Times, or whatever it might be? Prompt them to at least point them in directions that could help them explore a bit further to see, wow, there's this whole new thing that's emerging that I never even heard of. That I need to understand how this might fit into that whole. And I need to figure out the scientific translation, to this operational need, and how, yep, the little experiment that I'm doing over here, it explores a mechanism, some function that if we solve this, it could be relevant there and be a part of the future solution.
I feel like that also helps demonstrate indirectly that the PI is willing to do that little bit of extra work to look up the information, perhaps, ask for have conversation with some folks to develop those few sentences or a short paragraph. It's probably not going to be too long, but it's a good sign, right, that the person is willing to do a little work on that, and that
Yep.
could indicate, hey, maybe this PI is someone that if they are funded and the research gets going, they're going to want to grow these kinds of conversations, which would be excellent outcome from the efforts. Maybe it's like foreshadowing a little that they care, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as we wrap up our conversation, I would love to ask you what I think is a very fun question. What was your favorite part? What was the best part from your perspective of serving in the program manager role?
The best part, I mean, I would say most of us would say, it's the interaction with PIs, being able to engage with some of the smartest people on the planet, talk about science every day. People always ask me what I do, and they ask me about training, and I'm like, I do neuroscience every day of my life. Like, that's fun. And I'm thinking about my field in a way that I did not think about it 20 years ago. When I left my PhD, I'm thinking about all these other disciplines now and how they intersect and interact, and about a ton of new problem spaces. So that broadening of my personal scientific perspective, intersecting with then a broader set of scientists and engineers. And for me personally, I had the experience of doing this at an international level. And so living abroad, traveling the globe, you see universities around the world and engaging across culture and place, it gave me such an intriguing experience of how to do science. You know, where what's the state of the art? What does that look like across the globe? How do we enable in order to advance that state? And how not only is this relevant to the military, but how it's relevant to all of us. The broader context outside of defense and security. And so it gave me a very human view of science
Mhm.
that I really appreciated. And it was so much fun to engage in that way and
Yeah.
just experience people.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Fred. This has been a very productive conversation that has a lot of nuggets in here for our viewers. So, thank you very much for generously sharing your time and your wisdom with us today.
Thank you. It was fun.